Why did Agile begin? Where did it come from? And why is it so new now when it started in the 1990s-ish? So we're going to talk about Agile analysis and design and why Agile even was created in the first place. But before we get into the Agile Manifesto, let's talk about who are the people responsible for the Agile as we know it today. Well, think about 2001. 2001, 17 software developers got together in Snowbird, Utah, and formed what we now know as the Agile Alliance. But why? This was not their first meeting, by the way. These are the creators of Scrum and extreme programming and so on, who were frustrated in the industrial age trying to develop software that they'd never developed before. Think about what was going on. This is pre-Y2K. And so they got together and said, look, this front-loaded plan, this just isn't working. We have never been asked to do anything like this before. And ultimately, as we get into it, you'll see that many of whom were working in manufacturing plants and being asked to automate systems. Imagine going from punching a clock with a time card to an automated payroll system. These things had never been done before. Automating machinery, production systems, and using software. And so they were like, we've never done this before, so we know what the directives are. We just don't know how to reach that end goal. So they got together and formed the Agile Alliance and really were like, okay, we have to put some construct around something that doesn't have any constructs right now, other than the frameworks that we've been working with and trying to perfect as we go. And so what they determined in this meeting is that software development has to be based on iterative and incremental development. Yeah, we know we're building a payroll system and it's not going to turn into a video game, but at the same time, we don't know how to get there. We also want to make sure that we have higher quality software in shorter time frames. And as mentioned in the last section, that doesn't mean a year moves faster. It means that we're showing value sooner. If we're building a word processing program, we're not going to wait till the very end to unveil it and say, here you go, type, spell check, print. Nope, we're going to release type. We're going to have somebody demo, test, approve, type. Then we're going to add spell check. And if somebody decides at that point in time, hey, you know what, we want other fonts, well, we have to do the other fonts first before we do spell check because the code needs to recognize different fonts for spell check. So that is higher quality, faster with the adaptation of scope. Requirements and solutions evolve through collaboration and self-organized cross-functional teams. We'll get into that a lot more. That's a little bit of a different concept, especially if you work in a more hierarchical type of organization. During this meeting, they collectively created what we now know as the Agile Manifesto. And the Agile Manifesto is really just saying we value this over that. Now, if you were going to take an exam, I would say it's a good thing to memorize. But since this is foundations, let's just take a look at what the Agile Manifesto actually is and why it's so important and how it framed a lot of the Agile methods and best practices that we'll be talking about. So the very first one, and just to be aware of how to read this, the Agile Alliance isn't saying we do this over that. Instead, they're saying we value this more than that. We value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. If somebody says, look, this process isn't working and here's why, and everybody agrees, they'll say, all right, we're not going to do that anymore. So we're going to listen to individuals and interactions and not hang our hats so heavily on processes and tools. Working software over comprehensive documentation or working whatever. A comprehensive documentation without results is a waste of time. Now, in a predictive environment, we can create comprehensive documents because we're plotting out baselines. We're saying, this is how long it will take. This is the scope that we're creating. Here's the schedule. And those things get baselined, and that's the expectation. If something changes, we go through formal change control to adapt and adjust. But in Agile, it was like, we can't do comprehensive documentation because we know things are going to change. And therefore, sitting down and doing this documentation is wasting time. It's taking time away from producing something that works faster. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. This is another reason that the contract or procurement section in this class is pretty short. It's pretty short in other classes too. And the reason for that is that there has to be more flexibility in contracts for Agile projects. Contracts exist in Agile projects, but if you have a locked down contract that says you absolutely must do XYZ or face court, you can't really do that if you expect scope of work to change. So there has to be some flexibility. And they wanted to be able to collaborate with their customers who might want XYZ without being stuck in a contract or a potential breach of contract situation. Responding to change over following a plan. And therein lies the crux of Agile. Responding to change over following a plan. That plan being comprehensive documentation. Sometimes when people first see the Agile Manifesto, they're like, wow, all that really sounds like is that these people are flying by the seat of their pants. They don't have any process in place. They don't have any tools. But when we get into Scrum framework and some of the best practices for iterations, how to plan an iteration, that kind of thing, you'll start to see that emergent design, just like planning out your kid's calendar for 2 weeks versus a year, it makes better sense in certain industries. Not everything that we talk about is going to work for everyone. But at the same time, we're looking at the Agile Manifesto and we're looking at people and communication and collaboration and working software or whatever faster, more flexibility in procurement and more flexibility for changes. It sort of opened up the stopgaps in production for software development because they were like, wow, okay, so we have more flexibility now. We have more freedom to interact with people. Some processes and tools are helpful. However, the focus really needs to be on people and communication and finding better ways of working. So the majority of time is spent interacting, having transparent conversations, discussing what's known as the definition of done. What does done look like for type, for spell check? How do we know that this is going to be releasable and acceptable? These are different ways to move forward through iterations, and we'll discuss reviews and team building and communication and how all these things play a huge role in development. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Agile is about providing value. Documentation without whatever it is working offers no value. All it is documentation. So in this case, and we'll discuss some of this as we go, but just the idea of leaving documentation until the last responsible moment. Like we will make decisions and we will document what we need to document, but we're not going to front load it. We're going to do it when we have the information that basically says, all right, this is the direction we're going. This is what we're building. Working software and systems are more valuable to the company, to the end user, than documentation where they're like, okay, I see this written down, but I'm not seeing any results. What's the deal? Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Agile contracts are typically more flexible, which allow for changes in scope. As long as there is what's called a shared definition of done, we know what we're building. You're building a software program. It's going to have type, spell check, and print. Those are the main deliverables. And if things change, we're going to leave some flexibility. We'll talk about different types of contracts that sort of fix the price, but also allow for changes in scope up to that ceiling. The other idea behind this is to remove non-value adds with something that provides collaborative and result value. So we're going to build the simplest thing that works. We're not going to add anything to it that doesn't need to be there, leaving the pricing or contractual negotiations to go a little bit smoother, especially when we're responding to change over following a plan. We know that our initial plans are flawed. Flawed. Think about that word. A lot of people, that makes uncomfortable. That you would never go to a stakeholder and say, hey, look, we know our documentation's flawed. Well, have a good day. People wouldn't say that. They wouldn't say, my documentation's not flawed. But it is, right? So we're going to keep our documentation high level because we expect high rates of change. We know we're going to have to redocument. So why would we waste our time knowing something's flawed and do it a bunch of times instead of just waiting until the last responsible moment. Now, this idea that we don't plan at all in Agile is false. In fact, planning is going on all the time. And we'll talk about backlogs and what the product owner does and how they are the gatekeeper for scope creep. But at the same time, we allow this emergent design. We allow change. It just helps accommodate the creation of what the end user really wants. And the end user could be internal customer, external customer, but we're really trying to build something that the end user wants. And so a lot of the communication or documentation, instead of heavy documents that, maybe nobody ever looks at again, we have what are called information radiators. These are charts and graphs and very easy to read documentation so that everybody's kept in the loop and we have that documentation, but at the same time, we're just going to keep it as high level as humanly possible. The Agile Manifesto really encompasses a lot of the other best practices that we talk about. Co-located teams. Not everybody is co-located. Not everybody is all in the same building. In fact, a lot of us are hybrid, or we're virtual, or we are co-located and never left. But the idea of co-location, either virtually or in an office, for collaboration, communication, is going to be an important aspect to the structure of everything that we discuss in this class. Having that face-to-face or the Zoom call, having motivated individuals, people who actually want to be there, paying attention continuously to what is being created, removed, accepted, released, and also maintaining what's called a constant pace with no burnout. And most people laugh when them. The original extreme programming was like 40-hour work week, no overtime, and people thought that was hilarious. But back then, that was the assumption. There wasn't overtime. There wasn't a lot of overtime. And so the creators, especially of extreme programming, felt like, look, if they work a 40-hour work week with lunch breaks and that kind of thing and their weekends off, they can sustain that pace indefinitely, which I don't know about that, but you know what I mean, conceptually, indefinitely. And then regular reflection. We'll talk about retrospectives and looking back at the last 2 weeks, the last 6 months, and saying, what are we going to keep doing? What are we going to stop doing? What are we going to change? What's not working? And practice that continuous improvement going forward. We welcome changes, and the goal is customer satisfaction. But the way that we do this is keep it simple. Simplicity in the design. Don't add anything that doesn't need to be there. And bearing in mind, they're writing code to automate systems, to develop software. And the more complex it gets, the buggier it gets, the less it works, and it bogs down the speed of release. So keep it simple. Work with the organization, produce working software, and release frequently. Now, not every framework in Agile that we talk about has releases every 2 weeks. Sometimes it's like every 6 months, but still frequent delivery of whatever it is that we're building. During that meeting, they also were describing what's called the Declaration of Interdependence and trying to set some boundaries around what these concepts were. Because as you'll see, extreme programming and Scrum have similarities, but there are some differences as well. So in order to get everybody sort of on the same page, the Agile Manifesto and the Declaration of Interdependence to sort of set the stage for increasing return on investment by making continuous flow of value our focus. We deliver reliable results by engaging customers in frequent interactions and shared ownership, and the expectation of uncertainty. Like, we have to be comfortable with the fact that, hey, things could change. Not everybody likes change. So what we do is we plan things out in iterations and say, here's our expectation at the end of this iteration. This is what we should have. And we're going to anticipate and adapt as we go. We expect uncertainty. We unleash creativity and innovation by recognizing that individuals are the ultimate source of value and creating an environment where they can make a difference. You'll see once we get into the team side that there isn't a hierarchy on the Agile teams. Everybody has a role to play. And everybody interacts, and there's this idea of transparent communication. We boost performance through group accountability. So there's no finger pointing. It's like, hey, it's this. The group is accountable for the results. We improve effectiveness and reliability through situationally specific strategies, processes, and practices. If it works, we keep it. If it doesn't, we throw it away. So that whole idea of increasing ROI, delivering reliable results, expecting uncertainty, but allowing people to be creative. Now, software development is in some ways an art form, right? Allow them to be creative, boost performance, boost accountability, improve effectiveness and reliability. Everybody has skin in the game, and that makes it less directive and more collaborative. And that's really the idea. One of the things that we'll take a look at, especially when we get into Scrum, is something called empirical process control or empiricism. It's go with what we know today and make decisions based on what we know today. And if that changes or we gain new knowledge or information, we can adapt and adjust. And I know a lot of predictive project managers go to their management and say, hey, we should try this, and this would be great, this would really work. And they're like, no. And we're looking at it as, yeah, but this would be great. We just learned this. This is awesome. A lot of organizations are not compliant with, oh, let's change. Let's just change the way we're doing things. They don't like it. And so that can be difficult, when we look at going with what we know, practicing iterative planning and execution, incremental, frequent reviews, retrospective reflection on how things just went. And there's no real defined PMBOK guide, if you will. There's no defined singular process for agility, which is good. Because now you have the opportunity to sort of say, we're not just going to practice extreme programming. We're going to take this from that. We're going to take this from Scrum. We're going to take this from Kanban. We're going to take this from Lean. And we're going to craft and create our own way of working. And if it doesn't work or aspects don't work, we can change it.